Since the separation of the two sides of the Taiwan Strait in 1949, the Taiwan Strait issue has been a highly scrutinized hotspot, often seen as a potential epicenter for a large-scale armed conflict. Mainland China has consistently maintained that Taiwan is part of China, adhering to the One China policy, and has called on other countries to respect China's sovereignty and territorial integrity. This position has received recognition from most countries worldwide. However, some countries led by the United States, along with pro-independence forces within Taiwan, do not recognize this principle. With the United States vigorously promoting its pivot to Asia strategy in the 2010s, its strategic ambiguity approach to the Taiwan Strait issue has become increasingly apparent. The United States is not inclined to see both sides of the Taiwan Strait united under one power. Consequently, in recent years, the U.S. has increased the frequency and quality of arms sales to Taiwan and escalated friction with China in the Taiwan Strait. Clearly, if a conflict were to erupt in the Taiwan Strait, U.S. military intervention is highly likely. In response to this, Russian state media once published a report that assessed which countries are most likely to follow the United States' lead and get involved in the conflict if it were to occur. Among these, 5 countries were specifically mentioned. Let's take a look at these 5 countries. (1) Japan's decision. Russian media believes that if a conflict were to break out in the Taiwan Strait and the United States decided to intervene militarily, Japan would undoubtedly be the first Asian country to follow the United States. For a long time, Japan had been reluctant to get involved in Taiwan Strait affairs due to economic interests. After all, China is Japan's largest trading partner, and a war with China would severely harm Japan's economy. However, in recent years, Japan has gradually shifted its defense policy and advocated for the lifting of the ban on collective self-defense in the face of potential external threats. In this context, a sentiment has emerged in Japanese politics that, when there is trouble in Taiwan, it means trouble for Japan. Intervening in Taiwan Strait affairs during a conflict has become a highly probable choice for the Japanese government. Furthermore, the United States and Japan are military allies, with key U.S. military bases located within the first island chain in Japan. The 7th Fleet of the U.S. Navy, the 5th Air Force, and a Marine Corps Expeditionary Unit are all stationed in Japan. Additionally, Japan's southwestern region is geographically close to Taiwan. If the United States were to participate in a conflict in the Taiwan Strait, Japan would inevitably become a forward operating base for the U.S. military, making it impossible to remain uninvolved. In the event of a conflict in the Taiwan Strait, a coalition force composed of the U.S. military and the Japanese self-defense forces would likely emerge in the northern Taiwan Strait, presenting the People's Liberation Army with its primary adversary. 2. South Korea's stance. Apart from Japan, Russian media believes that South Korea may also become involved in a conflict in the Taiwan Strait and become an adversary to the People's Liberation Army. Unlike Japan, South Korea had not entertained the idea of getting involved in the Taiwan Strait conflict for a considerable period in the past. However, in subsequent times, President Yoon Suk-yeol promoted cooperation between Japan and South Korea, even at the cost of forgiving Japan for its actions during World War II, attempting to create a triangular alliance with Japan and the United States. His policy on the Taiwan Strait also underwent a significant transformation. During his visit to the United States in late April this year, Yoon Suk-yeol and President Biden issued the Washington Declaration. He claimed that the Taiwan Strait issue is a global issue and stated that South Korea would oppose any military attempts to change the current situation in the Taiwan Strait. From Yoon Suk-yeol's statements, it is clear that South Korea has aligned itself with the United States on the Taiwan Strait issue, and there is indeed a possibility of South Korea deploying its troops in the event of a conflict in the Taiwan Strait. 3. Philippines actively involved. Russian media also believes that, similar to Japan and South Korea, the Philippines is highly likely to become involved in a conflict in the Taiwan Strait. From a broader international perspective, the Philippines is already an ally of the United States, having signed the Philippine-U.S. Mutual Defense Treaty as early as 1951. During the Cold War, the United States stationed a significant number of troops, aircraft, and ships in military bases like Subic Bay Naval Base and Clark Air Base in the Philippines, a presence that only completely withdrew in 1992. Today, with the former President Aquino III and the current President Marcos of the Philippines progressively opening military bases to the United States, combined with the Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement between the two countries, the United States has regained access to 9 military bases in the Philippines, allowing its military forces to be stationed there for extended periods under the guise of visiting. The Philippines itself is engaged in territorial disputes with China in the South China Sea, especially over the Scarborough Shoal. Tensions flared up in 2011 and 2012, and it was only after Duterte assumed the presidency that the situation began to ease. However, with Marcos in power, the Philippines resumed a pro-American stance, expanding military cooperation with the United States. Territorial disputes with China over South China Sea reefs also reignited. Notably, in April of this year, the Philippines revived joint military exercises with the United States, conducting large-scale exercises in places such as Palawan and Luzon. The U.S. deployed 12,000 troops, while the Philippine military sent over 5,000 personnel, marking the largest number of participants in recent years. During the exercises, both sides practiced anti-ship, anti-submarine, and air-to-ground operations. In particular, the joint use of HIMARS, rocket launchers by U.S. and Philippine forces to destroy target ships, sparked significant speculation. Clearly, these actions indicate a confrontational stance, primarily aimed at China. No matter how you look at it, in the event of a conflict in the Taiwan Strait, the Philippines would be a significant opponent. 4. India's influence. Russian media also mentioned that India could introduce uncertainty into a conflict in the Taiwan Strait. Historically, India had not been involved in Taiwan Strait issues, and the Indian government had acknowledged the principle that Taiwan belongs to China. However, there has been a long-standing territorial dispute between China and India in the Himalayan region. India has insisted on China recognizing the so-called McMahon Line that was established during British colonial rule and does not accept the traditional Sino-Indian border, leading to India's occupation of a significant portion of the southern Tibet region, incorporating it into the so-called Arunachal Pradesh and Assam states. China has consistently opposed India's ambitions in this area, leading to a war in 1962. Since then, India has viewed China as a primary rival. Unlike Japan, South Korea, and the Philippines, India is not a heavily trade-dependent nation, and its economic ties with China are not as deep. Moreover, India's current ruling party, the BJP, has always pursued a strong policy of Indian nationalism and tends to be more exclusionary. They excel at using external threats to bolster their rule and gain popular support through populist means. As long as the conflicts between India and China remain unresolved, the Indian authorities are unlikely to abandon the opportunity to leverage tensions with China, creating friction and the potential for confrontation. This has been evident since the 2020 clashes in the Galwan Valley, where the Indian government actively suppressed Chinese businesses and retaliated against Chinese goods, with many voices in India even advocating for war at any cost. Unlike Japan, South Korea, and the Philippines, if India were to exploit a conflict in the Taiwan Strait, it would likely involve a land-based, rather than sea or air, confrontation. 5. Vietnam's choice. Finally, Russian media has mentioned Vietnam, and they believe that Vietnam, due to its conflicts with China, will likely challenge China alongside the United States in the event of a conflict in the Taiwan Strait. This is because China and Vietnam have territorial disputes in places like the Paracel Islands and the Spratly Islands, and the two countries have a history of past wars. Moreover, Vietnamese public opinion often views China as a competitor, similar to India, and there have been some frictions between China and Vietnam in recent years regarding the South China Sea issue. However, in reality, Vietnam is unlikely to engage in a war with China for several reasons, and they are more inclined to stay neutral in the event of a Taiwan Strait conflict. Firstly, Vietnam's military strength is insufficient to justify their involvement in a war. While the Vietnamese People's Army boasts more than 480,000 personnel, they severely lack modern weaponry and have limited information warfare capabilities. Furthermore, Vietnam's military budget is not high, with only $6.3 billion allocated in 2023, which is insufficient to sustain a long-term war effort. Secondly, despite its conflicts with China, Vietnam is not a follower of the United States in foreign diplomacy, let alone an ally. They prefer a balanced approach, seeking benefits from both sides. While Vietnam normalized relations with the United States in 1995, it remains a socialist country that adheres to a non-aligned foreign policy and has not become a military ally of the United States like some other Southeast Asian nations. The cooperation between the United States and Vietnam primarily revolves around politics and economics, rather than military matters. Vietnam is an economy heavily reliant on foreign trade, and from the perspective of Hanoi's interests, they clearly do not wish to engage in a military conflict with China. Lastly, it's essential to understand that Vietnam adopted a policy of renovation and openness in 1986 and abandoned the policy of long-term external warfare. Their leadership emphasized the construction of a peaceful and self-defensive national defense policy, focusing on economic development. Considering that since the adoption of renovation and openness, Vietnam has enjoyed the economic dividends of years of peace, and Vietnamese society is not willing to go to war after experiencing multiple wars in the last century. Today's Vietnam is far less likely to engage in war with other nations as it did decades ago. Therefore, the likelihood of Vietnam becoming involved in Taiwan Strait affairs is low. China should be more vigilant about the Philippines, Japan, South Korea, India, and the United States. This is the end of this video. Thank you for watching. Please like, subscribe, and comment. We genuinely appreciate your support.